What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and today I just want to talk briefly about something that I've been talking about for months now in terms of who's going to go bankrupt first. Is it going to be GM? Is it going to be Ford? Is it going to be VW, Toyota? And we're going to talk about that a little bit, or Chrysler. We're going to talk about that a little bit and all the craziness that's happening in the world right now, and more specifically in the U.S. or just in general. So with that being said, if this is your first time here, what's good? It's Sam here, and for those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. I'm sitting here at the Tesla Supercharger in near Charlotte, and I got me thinking that I've been saying this for months, how as we transition from dumb cars to smart cars, as we transitioned from the flip phone to the smartphone, there was a lot of disruption that happened with the phones industry, in terms of, like, Nokia's not even a fucking thought anymore, right? And I don't know of any other brands that made like flip phones, but the companies that are not able to adapt go away. When it happened with the switch from film to digital, there was Kodak went away, even though they actually created or patented or developed digital cameras. They didn't do anything with it, and they went out. They went bankrupt. The same exact thing is going to happen with automakers, in terms of the transition from dumb cars to smart cars, and from ICE engine vehicles, internal combustion engines, to EVs, which is a electric vehicle. There's two transitions happening at exactly the same time, and the way that traditional automakers are set up, they're not in any way, shape, or form ready to be lean or agile or have the capacity to pivot shortly when things change. Their current idea for their business model is to have a vehicle that takes several years and $7 billion to develop and then come out, and then they update that every several years. I think generally it's probably around the 7-year mark, I believe. And this is the way that it's been done for a long time. Now, I'm just going to contrast that to what Tesla does, that none of the other auto manufacturers are doing, and nobody else is actually talking about. Well, what Tesla does, when a new product or a new feature or something happens to the design, they just update it, period, and they just move that into production. Instead of waiting for if you're always ready and adaptable and flexible to when something is better, just go with the better option. Whether that's lower cost, more features for the consumers. When that comes along and you're able to implement it and execute on that much faster than your competition, who is not set up for the adaptability and flexibility that comes associated with that, they have to do these giant retooling of factories when things change. There's no flexibility compared to what we see with Tesla and their ability to implement these changes at a much faster rate than what is happening around the industry. And they might not necessarily be a lot of the things that they're like, well, the design looks similar. Well, I'm not talking about the design necessarily, but they do update that. But other features that are below the surface, or just minor things that most people who don't follow Tesla closely are not going to necessarily pay attention to, whether that's a software upgrade over the fucking internet to shorten the braking distance, or a software upgrade to the vehicle so that you can have dog mode in the vehicle, to other things like the floor mats changing, or how the seats are designed changing, or the wiring system that's inside of the vehicles, or the autopilot hardware and the chip itself and that iteration. So there's a multitude of different things that Tesla's doing and iterating a lot faster than the competition. And we have both of those tsunamis happening at the same time. The switch from a dumb car to a smart car, in terms of exactly the same thing. You can think about it like a flip phone to a smartphone. The same thing. I just mentioned the OTA, the over-the-air update for a software upgrade that increased the ability to brake more quickly. So it went from the Tesla Model 3, which is what I have, went from around 130 feet stopping distance down to like 108 or something along those lines. Maybe it was 148 and down to 28, 128. It had a large increase in this the ability of it to be able to actually stop more quickly over the air for free. Didn't have to go into a shop or anything. And the ability for Ford or GM or Toyota or VW, like which one of those is going to be the first one to like kick the can? Recently, in the last week or so, we've seen that Ford and GM have both announced that they're basically putting the fucking axe on their 2020 guidance for earnings, and Ford has canceled their dividend for the year, as well as draw down, I think, around $15.5 billion of revolving credit that had with two different institutions. And GM did the same thing a week later, but it was around $16 billion. And so as this transitions, I think if we were just looking at those four companies in terms of Toyota, VW, GM, and Ford, I think that the weakest out of those in terms of the strategy development and where the future is going to be played out over the next several years. But if I had to pick one today, I don't really follow Toyota at all. I don't think they're super relevant, so maybe that would be my choice. But I think they are one of the biggest players in terms of the volume of output in terms of vehicles on an annualized basis. However, I don't think that is a necessarily interesting metric to even consider at this point, because we have these giant shifts happening, right? Switching from ICE engine vehicles to EV vehicles, and switching from dumb vehicles to smart vehicles. You have two different things happening, and most of the industry is not paying attention. I don't think it's going to be VW. I think VW actually has the advantage here out of anybody else, because of their fuck up in terms of Dieselgate, where they were putting the emissions cheating stuff on diesel vehicles. And part of the punishment was that they needed to invest, I think, around $2 billion into alternative energy vehicles or green energy or something along those lines. Or maybe it was $5 billion. And that was a few years before everybody else. So that was one benefit they had in terms of already starting to turn this giant fucking ship in the right direction. And I don't think it's going to be VW. Interestingly, I think Barbara, or whatever her name is at GM, is also kind of slightly on board, but at a much, much later date in terms of the time of the process. So I don't think GM, I think VW is probably going to come out in terms of, if just these four, not considering other players entering or any other players in the market, just these four. But relatively speaking, I think VW is probably going to come out the best out of all this. And GM, and this is in a very long-term time horizon, like 10 years, GM will probably come out next. Now, the last two, I've always felt that Ford was a little bit behind on things because of the success with their Ford F-150. I think that I've never felt that they were really trying to be innovative if they are really trying to move the ball forwards. I always felt that they were a little bit behind. For whatever reason, that's the sense that I get from them. And Toyota, with some of the things that I've read around the executives, and there doesn't appear to have a, and I don't follow either of these any one of these companies as nearly as closely as I follow Tesla, even by a slight stretch. But I think that if I had to pick between the two of those, I would probably say Ford, just because I don't have any understanding of what is going on over at Toyota, other than not necessarily agreeing with some of what the executives have to say in terms of the direction they think the world is going. It doesn't appear. I think it's easier for people to see clearly when they're not in the midst of what is happening, and they can take themselves and almost go to like a higher place so that they can look out at that 50,000 square foot view of like what's actually happening, because we know fucking BMW is fucked by what their head of R&D is saying in terms of where he sees things going, and if he has any capacity to make any decisions of the company, they're definitely not going in the right direction. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down below in the comments section. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm super curious to see what alternative thought processes might be going on behind the scenes, and if you think that like another player, I think that it's very possible that another player could just come in there. You know what I mean? We have some other EV players on the market that are like Nivian or whatever it is, or Rivian, but then there's NIO. I'm sorry, Rivian, and there's also NIO, I think, in China. There's also a couple other companies. They're not at this, and those are EV, right? So they're not necessarily smart vehicles yet. The only player that I see that is actually succeeding is fucking Tesla. And I don't see any other players that are near any comparable slightly product on the market. Just when you look at any individual piece, whether it's the EV or from the ICE engine to the EV, or from a dumb car to a smart car, you have to consider the two things that are happening right there, because to go from ICE engine to an EV, that requires a certain type of expertise to do that, but also the expertise to have a UI or a user interface or the user experience, the UX on the car. Basically, you have you can think of it as like iOS or Android in your car, but it is Tesla that takes that expertise to do and design this software, right? But it also takes a different type of expertise to do the EV from an ICE vehicle. And when you have somebody in the market who is growing substantially, provides the best product in the world in terms of EVs and connected EVs in terms of a smart car versus a fucking dumb car, the talent likes to go where the action is. So the other players on the market haven't built these expertise up, and they're just so far behind the eight ball. Not that they wouldn't or won't. I just don't necessarily see. I see something like, well, all this craziness that's happening right now in the world with this virus as being a very, very good thing that is going to hopefully push a lot of companies into doing things that are far more intelligent from my point of view, in terms of the only constant in life is change. And so the most valuable thing is going to be the flexibility and adaptability through that change. And some of the structures that these companies have set up in terms of their systems and processes and the way that they do business are not super flexible and adaptable. So that's a current state of where I see things going, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe too. Make a lot of content. Jump over to Instagram and say what's good. Peace.